just came out and said that was nonsense. It wasn't true. None of it happened, right? Now, are people then going to say, well, okay, I guess there's no heaven? Of course not, for the most part, right? So it's like, is there a God? Do we die and go to heaven when we're dead? Is there a devil? There's no way to evaluate these statements from a rational standpoint, so they're neither part of philosophy nor science.
I see. Okay, if you want me to, I can move on to the next topic.
Okay, but we need to keep it a little short, but go ahead.
Okay, so moving on. You often mention on the show something that goes like this. I wish theoretical physicists would build something useful I could watch porn on. So I know it's a joke you make, and it's a pretty funny joke, but I think there's some true deep down that you actually mean it. And I think that's a bit of misunderstanding about how science and the free market intersect, specifically how theoretical science and the free market intersect. So, for instance, when we talk about lasers were created to test some of Einstein's theoretical physics ideas. And as any new technology, it was dangerous, it was large, expensive, and everyone thought it was useless. So basically, this is the worst idea you could possibly pitch to an investor, especially when you consider that investors can't understand what Einstein was saying. Basically, most people in the world could not understand these ideas. And it will take many, many years for the investment to pay off. Now, I'm against the use of money from taxpayers that it's extracted from the barrel of a gun, but I can see why the scientists would eventually go to the government for funding. And if it were not for the insane desire of the military to stay ahead in new ways of killing people, I'm not sure how the money for getting the technology off the ground will come from. Anyway, so after the initial burst of taxpayers' money, lasers became smaller, safer, and cheaper, and now they have applications that vary from TVs, microchips, light bulbs, printers, DVDs, fiber optics, and smartphones. So, science applied to the free markets means that the backside of your phone might have an Apple logo on it, but Apple did not invent your phone. In fact, Microsoft had done something very similar 10 years before and failed because it was too big and too expensive at the time. So
look, I'm sorry to interrupt, but so I think I understand the argument. Your argument is that if you fund theoretical physics, you can end up with free market applications.
Exactly, sure. Yeah, and took 100 years for it to happen.
But I couldn't possibly have ever denied that. I mean, of course that's the case. I mean, I've explicitly said that that's true. I mean, we got Tang because of the space program, right? So, of course, there's no question that theoretical physics have resulted in real-world, marketable, valuable, and useful applications. I mean, that to me is perfectly valid. Now, I'm guessing that you haven't studied a lot of economics.
I can't really say if I have. I'm not really sure. You can go ahead and explain to me.
Okay. So economics is the art not of looking at the visible benefits, but the hidden costs of things. Right. So the old example is a government program. They build a road to nowhere and they've employed 100 people for a year. And everyone who says, great, the government created 100 jobs. Look at those people have money to spend in their community, this, that, and the other, right? That's the visible benefit. Now, the hidden cost is all of the jobs that weren't created because the government took money from people who were being productive and may have wanted to create jobs and gave it to those 100 people to build a road to nowhere. And there is a hidden cost. Now, there's no question to me that the funding of theoretical physics has at times produced marketable goods or goods that, I mean, the very internet itself was developed as a government program to link the Department of Defense in case of nuclear war. So it'd be the fact that I produce a show over the internet the internet was originally funded and developed by the government, that would say there's no value to government science, I mean, would be a ridiculous position for me to take. The position that I do take is, you see the lasers, I see no cure for cancer.
Actually, right, there's cure for cancer.
You're looking at the visible benefits. You're looking at the visible benefits of forced reallocation of money. I get that. What I'm looking at is how much was stolen and taken from people in order to produce a laser that the free market would, I'm sure, have come up with at some point anyway. And did that delay the introduction of life-saving technologies or even just entertainment technologies by 10 or more years? Look at all the money that was put into the space program. Right? As John F. Kennedy said, I think in 62, get to the moon by the end of the 64, get to the moon by the end of the decade. And they spent hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, and they got to the moon. Mm-hmm. And there are pictures of Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong bouncing around on the moon in the merry, merry month of May. And people say, well, look, that's the way to waste government money. Yeah, we got to the moon. Absolutely. And getting to the moon may have given us other benefits and so on. But what does that have to do with anything? That's just looking at the visible benefits rather than the hidden costs. And the purpose, from an ethical standpoint, what I want is for voluntary relations, voluntary transactions, as you do, right? So we're on the same page as far as that goes.
Yeah.
But saying that I want physical theorists or physics theorists, theoretical physicists, there we go. I knew it. Break for it. The fact that I want theoretical physicists to be bound by the discipline of the market does not mean I don't want them to work on theoretical physics. I mean, there are many companies out there who would love to have, and probably do have, theoretical physicist departments who do nothing but come up and study the nature of atoms and matter and so on and that. And maybe some of that produces consumer goods and maybe it doesn't. There will be people who want theoretical physicists to study the nature of the universe, even if it has no market valuation, right? So, I mean, I'd be interested in knowing where the universe came from, and I'd chip in some money every year for people to pursue that, and even if they never produced anything of value. So, but that's all voluntary. What I don't like is people scientists who feel like, well, I want to play with the origins of the universe, so give me money, taxpayers, or I'm going to call on the cats in blue to drag you off to jail. So so there's a market for charity as well as there is a market for goods, right? Yes. So when I say, well, people will voluntarily fund theoretical physicists just out of curiosity, absolutely. And those theoretical physicists are then responsible to provide value to those who are donating. And theoretical physicists will do a lot better if they can show progress, right? So there'll be a competition among donation dollars for the best theoretical physicists to produce results. So yeah, of course, it was tongue-in-cheek to say I want them to produce something I can watch porn on. I get that. But the reality is, I just don't like it when people force me to pay for their stuff. And yes, they can cough up Tang and they can cough up lasers and stuff like that. But the reality is, far more has been destroyed than created.
I'm not really sure about that, because if you look into every single technology that we use on a daily basis, there's taxpayers' money on it. And the sad truth is that the taxpayers' money went through the military. And first,
come on, man! I mean, so in the past, every piece of clothing you bought had been made by a slave. What does that have to do with anything? It didn't justify anything.
Yeah. So no, I'm not saying it justifies anything. I'm just curious about how do you propose to replace the method of funding. I'm not saying it's something that
it's not my job to replace. It's not. How do you propose to get all of the cotton picked in the absence of slavery? It doesn't matter. It's not my job to propose what happens when we stop pointing guns at each other. Like if the government forced everyone to get married and you said, well, how are you going to ensure that everyone gets married in the absence of government? That's not my job. My job is to get people to stop pointing guns at each other. My job is not to figure out how they interact in the absence of guns pointed at each other.
I see.
How will you replace sex for the rapist?
The job of the moralist is thou shalt not thou shalt. The job of the dictator, of the central planner, of the state, of the priest in general, is thou shalt. Now, thou shalt is incredibly restrictive compared to thou shalt not. Thou shalt is binary, thou shalt not is just don't go here, go in the rest. Don't go initiate force, you can do anything you want.
Okay, so
when you say when human events and relationships and transactions and interactions are dominated by a thou shalt, and the ethicist comes along and says, that's immoral because that's the initiation of force, it is not the moralist's job to say how these interactions are achieved in the absence of violence. Any more, as Mike said, that it's the job of the ethicist to say to the man who's denied the capacity to rape, how's he going to get laid? Right? That the point is, don't rape. How you get laid is nobody's business but yours and whoever you're voluntarily having sex with. But the rape thing is definitely out of the question, right? You can't do that rape thing. And so how roads get built, how schools are funded, how theoretical physics gets its mojo and giant test tubes of discovering the origins of the universe is absolutely, completely irrelevant to the ethical question of should people initiate the use of force to get what they want. The answer is, of course they shouldn't. And UPB is, I think, a very great explication as to why. But when people then say, well, how is this thing going to be achieved in the absence of violence? Well, what on earth would my opinions have to do with anything to do with that? I do know, as an ethicist, as a philosopher, as a moralist, I do know that people should not be initiating the use of force against each other. What they should do in the absence of initiating force against each other would be a question that only a totalitarian mentality would try to answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And the difference is that I'm someone that's trying to understand it because I'm trying to figure out a way to do it. So that's why I asked the question. To do what? To fund science without having money from military
that's not a good job to have. That is a bad job to have. I'll tell you that right now, brother. Because the point is that we need to speak out against the violent transfer of money, which is really the violent transfer of people's lives. And the violent subjugation. It's the temporary enslavement of someone. If I go and steal $500 and it took them a week to make that money, I've just enslaved that person against their will for a week. So if you're interested in ethics, your job is to get people to stop, is to put down the gun, not to try and figure out what happens after people put down the gun. Put down the gun, then we'll talk. And for you saying, well, I got to figure out how to fund science in the absence of violence means that you're not actually on the front lines of trying to get people to put down the guns and reminding them that violence is immoral. The job of what do we do on the other side of violence, what do we do when we achieve peace, is not, first of all, we're not going to achieve it in our lifetime. So you will have no job if you're going to try and figure out how science is funded in the absence of the state. Well, you're going to live and die having the government around. So you're never going to get to implement whatever plan you come up with. I guess if you're independently wealthy or fantastic at raising money, you could try and bring up some sort of independent science institute or whatever. But they'll still all have to pay taxes, which will go to the other guys. So the job of the moralist is to continually expose and point out, nag, remind, bully, whatever it is, to tell people that there's the initiation of force in the world, which we need to stop doing. But the job of the moralist is not then to order people around afterwards and tell them, well, you need to do this, it was formally done by the government. And, no, that's not the job of the moralist. The job of the moralist is put down the gun. Then you can do whatever you want. But first you must put down the gun. And after that, my job is done.
I see. But the difference is that the way I think about it is to think about a way that would replace the government. And that will replace the need of the government, because we can actually fund the building of streets or fund the research and development. So if we don't do that, I don't see how the government is ever going to give up unless they become obsolete.
Well, the government is never going to give up. Power is an addiction, which is why we raise children to not be part of a dominance hierarchy where the ruler is exempted from the rules they impose on their subjects. We raise them in a different kind of family, and that different kind of family rolls out to a different kind of society. We want to grow children so that they're foreigners to a hierarchy. They will not assimilate. They will not, right, into a hierarchy. They'll obey the rules and so on, as a constant jail and so on, right? But there is no replacement of the government, because the government is through its initiation of force, is foundationally and fundamentally different from voluntary human interactions. There is no replacement to rape. right? Because lovemaking is not what replaces rape, because lovemaking and rape are polar opposites, right? Mm-hmm. They're about as opposite as things can be. And so what do we replace theft with? What do we replace assault with? What do we replace murder with? What do we replace the initiation of force with? I hope that makes